In their work coaching attorneys on time management, Mark Powers and Sean McNalis have found that the attorneys who come to them for help lose on average 6 weeks a year trying to retrieve information from paper-stacked desks and misplaced files. They believe that for most attorneys, the time loss is probably even greater. 6 weeks, probably more, every single year. Today, we're going to fix that. And along the way, we're going to talk about what attorneys can learn from the engineering discipline that put 2 men on the surface of the moon and brought them home alive. You do not want to miss this. I'm Robert Bunn. This is Estate Planning for Lawyers. Quick housekeeping before we begin. Nothing in this podcast is legal advice, and no attorney-client relationship is created by listening or watching. There's a full disclaimer at the end. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or another audio platform, thank you. I am glad you are here. If you have a moment, I would encourage you to subscribe on YouTube as well. And thank you for everyone watching on YouTube. The video adds another layer to the conversation. And if any of this is useful to you, please consider sharing this with another attorney who might benefit. The authors Mark Powers and Sean McNalis of the book Time Management for Attorneys, A Lawyer's Guide to Decreasing Stress, Eliminating Interruptions, and Getting Home on Time, published by Atticus, contend in Chapter 6 that crises inside a law office come mostly from undocumented procedures living in people's heads. And the cure is to externalize that knowledge into 3 concrete systems: a master checklist for every matter type, a model file that standardizes how each file is organized, and a standing inbox that triages paper the moment it arrives. Get those 3 in place, and the practice runs on the systems rather than the personalities. Now let's dive in. In the prior episode, episode 7, we worked on the architecture of the week. We talked about the time template. We talked about the 3-part power hour. We talked about triaging your to-do list so the right work gets your best hours. Today, we shift from the architecture of the week to the architecture of the work itself. Powers and McNalis make the case that even an excellent time template will not save you if the work inside a template is disorganized. The block is just a container. What you put inside that block has to be repeatable, teachable, and reliable. Otherwise, every file becomes an improvisation. The authors call this systemizing your office. And the chapter is, in my view, one of the most quietly important in the entire book. Powers and McNalis open a chapter by citing Thomas Leonard, whom many regard as the founder of business coaching. Leonard described problem-free environments as crisis-free zones. The authors take that concept and apply it to a law office. The authors draw a distinction that I want to emphasize. There are external crises and there are internal crises. External crises come from clients, referral sources, partners, and opposing counsel. You have limited control over those. Your influence is mostly upstream in who you choose to work with in the first place. Internal crises are different. Internal crises come from inside the office: poor protocol, a lack of written procedures, piles of files. Information is hard to find because no one has agreed on where it lives. Powers and McNalis are clear that you can preempt internal crises, and the way you preempt them is by systemizing your office. The authors target 3 areas in this chapter. First, a system of checklists that direct the workflow inside each file. Second, a model file for each type of matter that you typically handle. Third, an efficient filing system on your desk that processes paper as it comes in. 3 areas, 3 systems. We will walk through each. Before we get into the first system, Powers and McNalis describe a problem that I suspect many attorneys listening will recognize. The authors call it the personality-driven law office. In a personality-driven office, the procedures live inside the longest tenured employees' heads. Maybe a paralegal learned the workflow 10 years ago and has been running it ever since. Maybe a legal assistant brought a process over from a prior firm. Maybe the firm simply does things the way it has always done them, because that is how things have always been done. The procedures may even be good. The problem is not the quality of the procedures. The problem is that they are not written down. Powers and McNalis warn that when training depends on whoever happens to be standing next to the new hire, the training becomes inconsistent and unreliable. The rate of staff turnover in law offices is increasing, not decreasing under those circumstances. The authors point out that this matters not just for training, but also for quality control. I want to emphasize that. Not only for training, but also for quality control. If the only person knows how a particular matter is handled walks out the door, your quality control walked out with them. The first system Powers and McNalis recommend is a checklist system. The authors define a checklist as a step-by-step list of every activity or task that occurs within a particular type of file, ordered correctly, with a designated place to mark the due date and a place for staff to initial when each task is complete. The goal the authors describe is simple. Any person who picks up that file should be able to quickly determine the status of every task, each step identified, each step sequenced, each step checked off and initialed by whoever did the work. Nothing missed, nothing assumed, nothing living inside someone's head. Once a checklist has been refined and proven in practice, Powers and McNalis call it a master checklist. The authors recommend storing the master checklist in two places: on the computer, in a public directory accessible by the team, and in hard copy in a binder organized by the type of file. The authors recommend that the hard copy binder use a 3-tab structure. Behind the first tab, the master checklist itself. Behind the second tab, procedural notes, meaning the longer explanation that would not fit cleanly inside the checklist. Behind the third tab, samples of the documents commonly used in that type of matter: sample pleadings, sample affidavits, sample orders, sample letters, sample questionnaires. The authors are essentially building an in-house training manual, one file type at a time. Powers and McNalis make the point that this serves two functions. It is a reference tool for existing employees, and it is a training tool for new ones. The authors describe 3 different types of approaches to actually building a master checklist. I want to walk through each one because each suits a different type of practice. The first approach, Powers and McNalis call analyze and create the checklist. In this approach, you, the attorney, you do the work yourself. You pick a common type of file. You write the protocol for opening that type of file. You write the protocol for closing it. You look at the substantial activity that occurs in between, and you list them in outline form. You leave a place for the due date. You leave a place for the staff member to initial. Where it is helpful, you reference the location of relevant template documents on your computer system. The second approach, the authors call I'm a file. In this approach, the attorney still writes the opening and closing protocols, but the actual building of the checklist is delegated. Staff member physically follows a file through the office, pausing at every desk and station the file would touch as it moves through a typical matter. The staff member interviews each person who handles the file and assembles a rough draft based on what is actually happening, rather than what is supposed to be happening. The draft is then reviewed and refined into a final master checklist. The third approach, the authors call checklist in action. In this approach, the attorney again writes the opening and closing protocols, but the body of the checklist is built collaboratively. Each relevant team member keeps a yellow pad on their desk and jots down notes as they work through a live file. The notes are accumulated, drafted, reviewed, and finalized. 3 approaches. Each one trades off the attorney's time against the involvement of the team. The right choice depends on the size of the office and the bandwidth of the attorney leading the project. Powers and McNalis are clear about what happens once the master checklist is finalized. It goes on the computer, goes in a binder, and a copy of it gets attached to the inside flap of every new file that type as soon as the file is open. Some offices clip it, some staple it. Either way, the checklist becomes a permanent fixture in the file. The authors describe it as a running current picture of everything has been done on the matter to date. Once the master checklist is in place, the authors recommend that you treat it as a living document. Powers and McNalis are direct about this. A checklist will have mistakes. A checklist will have submissions or omissions. The job of the people using the checklist is to catch the mistakes, fill in what is missing, and improve the list over time. New versions are saved. The latest version goes in a binder. The latest version goes on the network. The team always has access to the current state of the system. The authors offer a framework for measuring whether a checklist system is actually working. A good system makes the work move faster by removing the steps that should not be there in the first place. A good system removes the guessing about what comes next because the next step is already on the page. And a good system gives the attorney confidence that nothing has been missed because every detail has a home on the list. If your checklist is not delivering all three of those, the checklist itself needs work and improvement. Powers and McNalis also suggests that you build client service prompts directly into the checklist. Things like preemptive status calls to the client, tours of the office for new clients so they meet the team, thank you notes to referral sources. The author's point is that the things you need to do but rarely get around to are the things that should live in the checklist itself. If it is on the checklist, it will get done. If it's not on the checklist, depends on who happens to remember. The second system Powers and McNalis recommend is the model file, sometimes called the model folder. A model file is in essence a template for how every file of given type should be organized physically. The authors recommend pocket files or multi-partition files with specific sections designated for specific categories of documents. The master checklist always lives in the front. The backup documentation lives in agreed upon locations behind it. The benefit is the same benefit you get from a well-organized briefcase or a well-organized kitchen. When everything has a place, you do not waste time looking for it. When you or your staff pick up a file, you immediately see the status on the checklist, and you immediately find the documents you need behind the right tab. The file becomes self-explanatory. The authors are essentially institutionalizing organization. The model file removes the variable of who set the file up because every file is set up the same way. The third system Powers and McNalis recommend is an action-oriented filing system on your desk. The authors are blunt about the state of most attorneys' desks. The paperless office, they note, has not arrived at the time of their filing. Research in the chapter estimate that we are dealing with 10 times more paper than when the paperless office was first predicted. The authors estimate that on average, attorneys they work with lose roughly, again, 6 weeks per year searching for paper-laden documents and misplaced files. 6 weeks a year. That is more than a month of billable time lost to disorganization. Powers and McNalis describe two personalities the authors have observed in attorneys. The everything out attorney who has everything out on their desk, credenza, and on the floor, because they do not trust any filing system to put the files away. The pile is their filing system. The most important files are on the top. The least important files are on the floor, accumulating urgency every hour that passes. The everything away attorney, by contrast, trusts the system. The desk is clear at the end of the day. Files in motion are stored in a holding location at the desk or credenza. The attorney relies on the calendar and the to-do list to service what needs attention, and on the weekly case status review meeting to make sure nothing is being neglected. I'll be candid with you, I have for a long time been an everything out attorney. The pile felt like control to me. The pile felt like memory. The truth, as Powers and McNalis describe it, is that the pile was a substitute for a system I had not yet built. The authors recommend that you replace the piles with a process they call paper triage. The word triage is one we covered in the previous episode. To recap briefly, triage means a sorting of competing demands by urgency and the likelihood of benefit from intervention. The authors apply the same concept to the paper that lands on your desk every day. Powers and McNalis describe a few reasons that paper accumulates the way it does. One reason is that the paper has nowhere to go, because no one in the office has built an actual home for it. Another reason is that the attorney does not make a decision the moment the paper arrives, so the paper sits while the decision is deferred. And a third reason is the physical geometry of a stack. When paper is stored flat, the moment another piece of paper lands on top of it, the lower document becomes invisible. Standing files on end, they argue, solves the geometry problem. The author solution is a kind of upgraded inbox, a standing file folder standing within easy reach of the desk, holding 4 files that open at the top. The first is a hot file, color-coded red or orange. This file holds the truly urgent, deadline-driven work that needs your attention immediately. When the staff needs you to act on something, it goes here, appropriately flagged. The authors recommend you make a habit of touching this file frequently throughout the day. The point is to centralize urgency in one easy-to-access location, rather than leaving urgent items buried in piles. The second is the delegation file. This is where paperwork that needs to be handed off to a staff member lives. The authors recommend a delegation folder or file or a post note with each file designating what needs to be done, when, and by what priority. When you meet with a staff member, the file is ready to go. The authors note that case management software with the to-do list functionality can supplement this electronically. But for most teams, a brief in-person meeting still works better than a posted task alone. The third is the holding file. This is where lower priority files live. Important, but not time sensitive. The authors warn that this file should not become a black hole. They recommend blocking weekly time on the calendar to work through whatever has accumulated in the holding file. The fourth is the reading file. Bar publications, seminar notifications, CLE material, articles that you mean to read. The authors recommend either scanning the publication and pulling out the articles that genuinely interest you, or simply dropping the publication into your briefcase for reading on the go. For those of us who carry a tablet or a phone in place of a briefcase these days, the same principle applies. Save the article to your reading app. Send it to your read later queue. The point is the same. The article gets out of the pile and it goes somewhere you will actually open it. And then Powers and McNalis mention one more file, which they describe as often underused. The circular file. That's the wastebasket. The authors recommend being ruthless. If the document is redundant, or if you can reproduce it later online when you actually need it, throw it out. The volume of paper that crosses an attorney's desk every week is too high to keep everything. There is one part of this chapter I want to spend a moment on, because I think it changes how the system feels in practice. Powers and McNalis include in the chapter an interview with G. Patrick Owen, a Florida pilot, a former carrier pilot instructor with the United States Navy, and a flight instructor for a commercial airline. The authors interview Owen specifically to understand why aviation, which is a high-stakes profession, relies so heavily on checklists and systems. What Owen tells the authors, and what I want to share with you is this. Systems and checklists in aviation are not bureaucratic. They are the opposite of bureaucratic. They are how a pilot frees up cognitive bandwidth for the things that actually require their judgment. Owen describes a priority hierarchy in aviation. First, the systems that keep the airplane in the air. Second, the systems that keep the airplane going in the right direction. Third, the system used for communication, both with the tower and with passengers. The point Owen makes in the interview is that communication comes last. You handle communication only after you have stabilized the flight and figured out where you're headed. Owen also tells the authors that pilots who resist checklists, they do not make it as commercial pilots. The commercial airlines, in Owen's experience, do not want anyone improvising outside the established process without checks and balances. The expectation is that team supporting the checklist and supporting the system. The lesson the authors draw from Owen is one I want you to sit with. Checklists are not for the routine cases. Checklists are for the day when the routine case stops being routine, and you need every ounce of brain power available for the genuine problem at hand. The checklist handles the minutia, so your judgment is available for the core issue. I find that framing genuinely persuasive. And I think it is the strongest argument in the chapter for why systemizing your office is not optional. Before I share a related story, I've been wanting to tell you, I want to spend a moment on a book that when I first read it years ago, fundamentally changed how I think about systems. The book is The Checklist Manifesto. written by Dr. Atua Gawande, a surgeon at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, a professor at Harvard Medical School, and a writer for The New Yorker. Dr. Gawande contends in his thesis that across high-stakes professions, from medicine to aviation to construction to investment management, the volume and complexity of what a skilled professional needs to know has now exceeded the capacity of any individual human mind to hold reliably under pressure. The result is what Dr. Gawande calls errors of ineptitude, not errors caused by ignorance, errors caused by people who knew exactly what to do and failed to do it because something was missed at a critical moment. Dr. Gawande's solution is the humble checklist, not as a substitute for expertise, as a scaffold for it. He studied surgical teams who adopted a brief safety checklist before operations, and the results were dramatic. The checklist did not make the surgeons more skilled. It cleared away the cognitive clutter so that the surgeon could bring their full attention to the parts of the operation that actually required surgical judgment. That insight changed how I think about my own practice. Reading Dr. Gawande's book years ago, I came to understand that a checklist is not a constraint on professional discretion. It is the precondition for professional discretion. By placing every routine in its proper sequence, in its proper space, at its proper time, the checklist frees the mind for the moments that actually need it and demand it. There is a special story I want to share with you because I think it captures everything the Powers and McNalis are arguing in this chapter. It relates to Buzz Aldrin. A signed photograph from him to me, along with a letter from his and my friend Bobby, sits on my office wall. And I'm reminded of its lessons every day. Some years ago, I had the privilege of being taught at Harvard by Robert B. Charles, known to his friends as Bobby. Bobby served as Assistant Secretary of State for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs with Secretaries Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice. He served in 3 presidential administrations. He was a naval intelligence officer. He is an attorney trained at Columbia Law School with a graduate degree from Oxford. He is currently a candidate for governor of the state of Maine, and he is, I'm proud to say, a personal friend. Bobby is also a close personal friend of Dr. Buzz Aldrin, the Apollo 11 lunar module pilot who walked on the moon with Neil Armstrong on July 20th, 1969. Years ago, Bobby sent me this signed photograph of Dr. Aldrin on the lunar surface that I just mentioned. The inscription reads, among other things, to Robert, keep aiming high. I look at it every day. Dr. Aldrin holds a doctorate of science in astronautics from MIT. His doctoral thesis, titled Line of Sight Guidance Techniques for a Manned Orbital Rendezvous, developed the mathematical techniques that allowed 2 spacecraft to find one another and dock in orbit. Without that work, the Apollo program could not have functioned. The lunar module could not have separated from the command module, descended to the surface, and then returned to dock again in lunar orbit. Dr. Aldrin did not just go to the moon. He helped design the mathematics that made going possible. On July 20th, 1969, after Dr. Aldrin and Mr. Armstrong completed their walk on the lunar surface and returned to the cabin of the Eagle for the rest period before liftoff, Dr. Aldrin noticed something on the floor that did not belong there. A small piece of plastic. On closer inspection, it was a circuit breaker switch for the ascent engine, the engine that would lift them off the surface of the moon. The bulky life support backpacks had sheared off in the cramped cabin. They radioed Mission Control. Mission Control, 238,000 miles away, did not have a ready answer. Engineers on the ground began working the problem. Dr. Aldrin and Mr. Armstrong, exhausted, attempted to rest. When Dr. Aldrin and Mission Control got to the appropriate point running through their checklist to return to the problem during the ascent preparation, Dr. Aldrin had thought it through. He could not insert anything metal into the opening because metal would short the circuit. He had a felt tip pen in the shoulder pocket of his spacesuit. The plastic body of the pen was non-conductive. He inserted the pen into the opening where the switch had been. The circuit closed. Houston confirmed a live circuit. The ascent engine fired on schedule. They came home. Dr. Aldrin saved Apollo 11, the mission, and their lives. It is my contention the checklist made it possible for him to do so. Dr. Aldrin had that felt tip pen on him in the first place because he wanted the checks he made on his own checklist to be clear and unmistakable. Checklists are critical, just as checklists clear away the cognitive clutter for surgeons so they can bring their full attention to the moments that require specialized judgment. The same cognitive clarity was at play on the moon. Checklists contemplated and created in advance, taking into consideration thousands of potential procedures, addressed in their proper order, in their proper space, at their proper time. By the moment Dr. Aldrin saw that broken switch on the floor in the cabin, his mind was not cluttered with 100 unresolved other problems, tasks, or concerns. It was clear. He could give the broken switch his full attention. He could think the problem through without interruptions, without panic, and without the background noise of everything else he could have been worrying about, because none of those other things had been left for him to worry about. That is what Dr. Gawande means when he writes that checklists protect judgment rather than replace it. That is what Powers and McNalis are arguing across this entire chapter. The attorney who is systemized with routine is the attorney who has bandwidth left over for the moment that genuinely requires it. The attorney who is improvising every routine task is the attorney who has less in reserve than would otherwise been available when something actually difficult needs to be handled. Dr. Aldrin's ingenuity saved the mission and the lives of two men. The felt tip pen completed the circuit. Checklists, I would argue, did something equally important. They are the reason that pen was in his pocket in the first place. And they are the reason his mind was clear enough to know what to do with it. I want to talk about this material as a Florida attorney building estate planning practice. When I founded Bunn Law, PLLC, I thought initially that the systems could come later. Powers and McNalis would, I think, gently push back on that. The author's point is that the right time to build a system is before the volume forces you to. By the time the volume forces you to, you're building the system in the middle of a crisis. That is the hardest time to build anything. For estate planning specifically, this material lands with particular weight. The estate planning matters are in many respects more systemizable than litigation matters. The work batches well. The documents repeat. The intake questions are largely the same. The signing protocols are largely the same. The funding steps largely the same. There is real leverage in building a master checklist for each major matter type. The simple will, the revocable trust, the trust with tax planning, the healthcare surrogate package, the funding workflow. Each one is a candidate for the treatment Powers and McNalis describe in this chapter. Years ago, when I was a prosecutor in the 10th Judicial Circuit, my office hammered home one particular discipline, and we were held strictly accountable to it. If you touched a file, you documented it. Complete, accurate, and thorough notes on what had transpired with the file, the defendant, and the status of the case. The standard was this. Any prosecutor in our office should be able to pick up any case, having never reviewed it before, and after reading the notes at the front of the file, be fully up to speed, with little to no loss of institutional knowledge. That discipline existed for a reason. Prosecutors get reassigned. Prosecutors get sick. Prosecutors go on vacation. The case does not stop moving because a particular human being is unavailable. The documentation was how the office protected the defendant, the victim, the witnesses, and the integrity of the prosecution itself. It was non-negotiable. Reading this chapter brought that discipline back to me. What Powers and McNalis are describing in the language of private practice is the same principle I learned in a public sector settings where the stakes were criminal liberty. The master note sheet, the discovery checklist, the additional checklists I had on the inside flap of files. The model organization that lets any team member find exactly what they need. The contemporaneous notes that make the file notes readable to anyone who's never seen it before. The mechanics are different. The underlying principle is identical. The piece of the chapter that landed hardest for me personally was the section on the everything out attorney. I recognize myself in it. The piles on my desk have always felt like control. I will always be thankful for my secretaries at the state attorney's office who helped me with that and stay organized and my inbox manageable. The reality is that the piles of files on my desk, on the floor, etc., have always been a substitute for a system I had not yet built or knew was available. The standing inbox with the 4 files is something I'm implementing in my office now. The discipline of touching the hot file frequently and clearing the desk every evening is something I am still working on. I do not have this solved. I am working on it alongside you. Here's the part of the conversation where I turn theory into something you can act on. 5 things you can do this week to put this material to work for you. Each one is small enough to start the very next time you sit down at your desk, and large enough to change how your office feels within just a few days to weeks. 1. Pick one matter type and build the first checklist. Do not try to systemize everything at once. Choose the matter type you handle most frequently. Use the analyze and create approach if you have the bandwidth, or the I'm a file approach if you do not. Get a first draft into a binder. Get a copy on the network. Attach a copy to the next file of that type that you open. 2. Create the binder, a physical 3-tab binder. Master checklists behind the first tab. Procedural notes behind the second. Sample documents behind the third. The binder is what makes the system real and physical to the people who use it. 3. Design the model file. Decide where the checklist lives inside every file of that type. Decide where you document notes in the file and digitally every time you touch the file. Decide where the intake documents live. Decide where the correspondence lives. Decide where the signed originals live. Then enforce that organization on every new file of that type when it opens. 4. Set up the standing inbox. 4 files: hot, delegation, holding, reading. Place it within easy reach. Stop creating piles. Start triaging. 5. Clear your desk at the end of every day. Powers and McNalis call this a discipline. It is. The first few times I feel like an interruption to the work. I still struggle with this. But within a few weeks, you will not want to start your day any other way. A clear desk produces clear thinking. A clear desk lowers the background noise that paper clutter creates. And a clear desk lets you walk into your office in the morning and address the work in front of you in order without distraction. Do those 5 things and your office will look different by the time you finish your first checklist cycle. My personal takeaway from this material is this. I would call systemizing the office the difference between a practice that depends on the attorney and a practice that supports the attorney. In the personality-driven office, the work depends on whoever happens to be at their desk that day. In a systemized office, the work has a structure that survives turnover, illness, vacation, and growth. Powers and McNalis are not asking you to become a different kind of person. The authors are asking you to externalize the knowledge that currently lives inside your head and inside the heads of the longest tenured people on your team. Once that knowledge lives in a checklist, the model file, and a standing inbox, the office runs on the system instead of the personalities. And that, in my view, is what protects the attorney, their time, and their attention. My personal advice: protect your time, guard your focus. The chapter is, on its face, about office logistics, but underneath the logistics, the chapter is about something deeper. The chapter is about building a practice that can hold the weight of the work you do without breaking the person doing it. In the next episode, we move from systemizing the office to defending the time you have created inside it. We will be working with Chapter 7 of Powers of McNalis, titled Proactive Strategy 7, Managing Interruptions. We will identify where interruptions come from in a typical law practice. We'll talk about how to prevent the ones that can be prevented. And we'll discuss the author's tactics for handling the ones that cannot. If today's conversation was about building the systems, the next one is about building the team that runs them. The two work together. You'll want both. Before we close, thank you for spending your time with me today. I know your time is valuable. The fact that you spent some of it here on this conversation matters to me. My hope is that the last half hour was useful to you, something you can put to work the very next time you sit down to do your most important work. To reiterate what was said at the beginning, nothing in this show is legal advice, and no attorney or client relationship is formed by listening or watching. The information presented here is general and educational and is not a substitute for advice from a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction reviewing your specific facts. The views I share are my own on behalf of Bunn Law PLLC. All references to time management for attorneys, A Lawyer's Guide to Decreasing Stress, Eliminating Interruptions, and Getting Home on Time by Mark Powers and Sean McNalis, published by Atticus, are made for purposes of commentary and educational purposes only. All rights in that work belong to their respective owners. My discussion is commentary and analysis, and neither the authors nor the publisher have endorsed or affiliated with this show. I recommend everybody buy a copy. Subscribe to Estate Planning for Lawyers so you will not miss our next show. I'll see you there.